Hi, everybody. My name is Soojin, and I'm serving on the editorial board of the SOLA Network. And I am so excited to be here today with Izzy Koo, who is the author of the book Finding God, Finding Me. Just a quick bio for Izzy. Izzy is currently a freshman at Pepperdine University studying religion and English, and she hopes to pursue youth ministry in the future. She herself was radically impacted by God during those teenage years, specifically in her sophomore year of high school. The passion she gained to spread God's love at that time has led Izzy to write this book and to start a blog, to write music, and most importantly, to strive to be a light to people wherever she goes. So welcome, Izzy. I'm glad to have you here.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
Yes, I know. We've been trying to make this work for a while, and I'm so glad that we could finally hop on and get this going. And I'm so excited to have you because it's really not common to meet such young people who have a published book under their belt. And so I just want to jump right in and ask you, Izzy, what is it that inspired you to write this book? Like, what led you to decide I'm going to publish a book?
Yeah. No, thank you for the introduction, Susan. I'm so glad that we're finally able to meet like this. But I think what really inspired the book was simply kind of like you said, that I had radically met God and my life was changed, and I just wanted people to know about it. I think my moment of encountering God in my sophomore year of high school, it was such a transformational event for me where through it, I really found everything. I found confidence, identity, passion, purpose, kind of like how I talk about in the book. And ultimately, I think I found myself.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing was that when I returned back to school or my youth group or my volleyball team, I just saw everything differently. And I think I saw my friends and I saw my classmates and just people I didn't know. And I saw the hopelessness and the insecurity in them that I used to struggle with so much myself. And I think all I wanted to do was tell them my story of how Jesus helped me overcome those things and really bring me to a place of just an indescribable joy and a peace. And I wanted to tell them how God had changed me and that he could change them too, if they just opened their hearts to it. And so it was through that conviction and then the push of my mentor at the time, her name was Pastor Esther, that kind of led me and inspired me to write the book. And from there on out, I think it was just a clear prompting from God that this was something that he wanted me to do.
That's awesome. I feel like the fact that you grew up in the church, right? But that like
Yeah,
you had this radical moment where things became so clear to you.
right.
I think a lot of people want that, or they're looking for that almost.
Yeah,
So can I know you talk about in the book, but just for a little preview, can you share a little
yeah.
bit about what do you think it was that kind of led you to finally have this eye-opening moment?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think I've thought about it a lot. Because it's so true that even if you grow up in the church, it doesn't mean that you have this deep relationship with God.
Mhm.
And I didn't even know what I was missing. Because I just grew up in the church my whole life. I thought that I had everything. And then it was kind of that moment of encountering, and I realized, wow, like this is the kind of transforming love and power that God can have on a life. But I think when I just look back at my whole story and just my whole life, I think God had to kind of bring me to a point where he stripped everything from me and brought me to a place of complete brokenness and helplessness where I needed him the most. Because if he had maybe revealed himself to me earlier, I think I wouldn't have appreciated his love for me as much because I didn't need it as much. I was okay,
Mhm.
more or less. But kind of taking away like the friend group that I had at the time, the church that I had at the time, and everything kind of went to ground zero. I think I came to a place of desperation of realizing I needed God so bad. And it was through that where I was able to experience his love fully and immensely, and God really captured my heart through that.
Yeah. I think it
Yeah.
just goes to show that even the good things that God has given us in our lives, often they can work against us, right? And blind
Right.
us from what truly matters. So what a encouragement to hear you say that instead of just resenting God in the midst of your losses, the fact that God was able to show you his love, just praise God for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I mean, so you wrote this book, you were still in high school. I'm sure it was a daunting process. So I'd love to hear from you a little bit about just what that process was like for you as a first-time author and just being so young while you're doing it. Was it scary? Was it stressful? What was it like for you?
Yeah. Well, the idea of just writing a book at all was kind of not in the picture ever. Because I mean, that's not an idea. I feel like that first comes to your head.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also a perfectionist by nature. So I struggled so much with writing in high school when it came to like
Mm-hmm.
essays and just those one-page papers. I could not put my thoughts down for the life of me. But when I started to write this book, it was crazy because the writing came so effortlessly for me. And it was truly as if God was writing the pages. And as I reflect upon it, I think it was because it was the first time where I was passionate about what I was writing about and I wanted to write about it. And more than that, I think I needed to write about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I kind of began that process and just through praying and just seeking the will and the heart of God, I think God really, it was as if he was sitting right next to me, writing the pages for me. And that's how it felt like, a process that came so naturally in the face of something that would honestly really be difficult.
Yeah.
And then the publishing process, that's also supposed to be really hard as well. And I didn't know anything about the publishing process going
Mm-hmm.
into it. I kind of learned as I went. But the publishing process for a first-time author to get published, it's less than a 1% chance.
Mm-hmm.
And because, I had no following or I don't have any fame background and stuff like that, the odds are even further against me in that sense. Um, but I just remember a night, it was before my parents even knew that I had wrote a book, but I had the completely like finished manuscript in my hands. And then my sisters were in my room and they knew about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just held their hands and they prayed over the book.
Wow.
And I still have that whiteboard in my room with their signatures just saying, Amen, Amen.
Mm-hmm.
Next to that prayer of like, let this book get published, not for the sake of just it being published, but so that God would really be glorified and use this book in the way that he wants to reach the people that he wants to. And so when I think about the book being published, I really look back at that moment of prayer, because I think that's when those seeds are planted and God really used that to allow the whole process to happen. And from there, I think 10 weeks later, the publisher reached out to me. They
Wow.
said they wanted to take a chance on the book. And
Mm-hmm.
from there, it was just fun. It was just a process, like 6 months of editing, of designing, of creating.
Mm-hmm.
And the book was shortly released, 2021.
Wow.
Is now available.
Yeah, I think what just really encourages me hearing you talk about that is the fact that when God calls us to difficult tasks that we feel unequipped for,
Yeah.
I feel like he is so kind in giving us what we need, what, through the Spirit helping you write or opening doors to the publisher. So that's such an encouragement to all of us that when we feel called to these difficult and weighty tasks, we can trust that
Yeah.
God really will give us exactly what we need. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to dive a little bit into just the actual meat of your book. I don't want to spoil too much. I want everyone to go and read the book themselves, but I think there were certain parts of the book that really stood out to me just because I've done youth ministry for the last 4.5 years of my own life. And so there were things where I just really resonated with some of the things you shared. And I thought, what a great way for you to give encouragement to teens right now who may be struggling with these things. So one thing that really stood out to me is you open in your first chapter by sharing a story of how you felt conflicted and isolated from your friend group because one of the friends in your friend group felt that she could not share openly about her sexuality because she knew you were a Christian. And so I think this is a really common experience. I think there's a lot of Christian teens out there who more and more don't know how to handle these situations where they have non-Christian friends who have openly differing beliefs, and it makes them feel isolated if they stand up for what they believe. And so what kind of encouragement or advice would you give to teens who may be wrestling with that kind of scenario in their social lives?
Yeah, such a good question. I think what I struggled with and did poorly in the past was thinking that I had to bring up the word Christian, bring up the word God, I think everywhere I went without any kind of filter. And I thought that by continuing to talk about God and continuing to push forward the idea of Christianity would be what made people accept it. In the end, what I learned through my experience is that you don't have to verbally say anything about being a Christian to show that you're a Christian and that you love God. And the most powerful thing that you can do in an environment that tends to shut down verbal expressions of faith is to really show them your love and friendship through your kindness and through your selflessness and the joy that you come every day with to school and the peace that you have despite, difficult circumstances that come your way. And I would say to just be that loving and welcoming person first, because I think
Mhm.
if you do that, then you'll see the beauty that God shines through you to your friends and your community that will lead them to God without you ever even having to say the word Christian. And I think the goal is to really be so radical of a person that your friends will want to ask you, hey,
Mm.
like, why are you so different? Right? Why do you always smile? Or how can you be happy right now when those things are going on in your life? So even when you're just surrounded by people and friends who don't know or who don't share your beliefs, I would say to just love them and to be kind and
Yeah.
show them through your character about the God that you follow.
Mhm.
And even through just your kindness, I think those seeds will be planted in their heart.
Yeah. I think that's a good word even for grown adults who are not
Yeah,
in high school. Yeah, even
right.
myself and peers around my age, I know it's hard. Or even with coworkers, I know
Mhm.
there's always that pressure to either have all the right answers and be able to say all the right things, but at the same time, no one feels fully equipped to do that, or it's scary to like have to
Yeah,
explicitly say all these Christian things. And so I think your
yeah,
word is a good one that, I think kindness is underrated. So being
Mhm.
kind, being
Totally.
loving, yeah, and like building that relationship as a platform. And I'm
Mhm.
sure God definitely opens doors for those explicit conversations to happen,
Yeah.
but definitely it happens on a foundation of relationship. That's awesome.
Mhm.
Do you feel
Yeah.
like you said, in the past you weren't so good at it. So do you feel like you
Yeah.
learned that the hard way a little
Oh,
bit? Like,
totally.
yeah.
Yeah, I think I definitely learned it the hard way. Kind of with the experience of friends that I talk about in that first chapter of the book.
Mhm.
I think that was kind of that learning experience where I realized I didn't handle that maybe as best as I could have. And just
Mm.
from there, having experienced God and realizing that there's so much more to showing somebody that about the love of God than just saying it
Mm.
verbally. I think in my experiences after that, I really tried to just be that person first that welcomes a new student or goes to sit with that person at lunch who has nobody to sit with. And it was through that, like just how you said that, then those explicit conversations come up
Mhm.
through those
Mhm.
windows of opportunity that you create through the foundation of just genuine relationships.
Yeah. And it's a
Yeah.
challenge. I think sometimes we think that like, you know, being the best speaker and having all the right answers is the hardest thing, but sometimes the
Yeah.
hardest thing is going up to the person that's alone in the lunchroom and sitting with them. That's
Right.
usually really hard. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's a challenge for all of us.
Yeah.
I think something else that really stuck out to me in your book
Mhm.
was later in the book, you talk about how during the pandemic, during the COVID-19 shutdowns, you
Mhm.
realize how it's so much easier to feel God when you're surrounded by Christians at church. And
Yes.
I think a lot of teenagers during the pandemic felt this, not even teenagers, but just people in general. But I notice also with even doing youth ministry myself, I think especially teens, I think a lot of them felt that disconnect. But even after the shutdowns stopped and even after they came back to church, they never
Yeah.
fully reconnected with other believers or with God. And so I see a lot of people and a lot of students who just post COVID are feeling stuck and feeling
Yeah.
slow and dry in from that.
Mhm.
And so what would you say to especially those teens who may be feeling stuck in that? And do you have any like practical help for how someone could try to get out of that?
Right. No, that's a really good point because it's so true that I think a lot of us have a community-based faith, but don't necessarily have a strong foundation of a private faith.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess to those who feel like they can't experience God without their church or their community or their friends, I would say that first I understand and I've been there. And what allowed me to have more of a private faith is to do what it says in the Bible. In Matthew 6, it says to go to your room, to close your door, and to pray to your Father.
Mm.
There's just this peace that passes understanding and a warmth just beyond anything that you can describe that occurs, I think, when it's just you and God.
Mhm.
And that one-on-one relationship is so important because if you just hang out with God in these group settings, then you never get to know him on the intimate level that he wants to know you on. And so I would say to push yourself to embrace kind of the bit of awkwardness that comes with the silence of it just being you and Jesus. Because it
Yeah.
can be a little awkward if it's just you and him in the room, but it's in that silence that God will do something that makes that silent room feel so
Mhm.
full.
Yeah.
So feel so filled.
Yeah.
For me, I thought that, I needed people, I needed my pastor, I needed my friends for me to feel the love of God. But in reality, even though we feel like those are the people showing us love, it's God working through those people. And it's God that's ultimately surrounding us all the time, whether we feel lonely or whether we feel fulfilled, he's the one right there. And so just to keep that in mind and to know that, I think can be really helpful for
Yeah.
people who are looking for that.
I think that's really good. And, it reminds me of something I always share with, youth students, college students, whatnot, is that
Yeah.
we have this skewed view, I think, of relationship with God, where with
Mhm.
any other relationship in our lives, whether it's friends, significant others, or even family members, if that person doesn't try to spend any time with me, I'm not going to feel like there's much of a relationship. But
Right.
for some reason, when it comes to our relationship with God, we don't have that same mentality where we think this relationship should just happen and be flourishing with no effort and no time put into it.
Right.
Yeah. And I love that you kind of acknowledge that it can be awkward. Yeah, it can be
Yeah.
awkward, and that's normal, I think, for
Yeah.
all of us. And so just kind of getting through that, or even getting through the days where you really don't feel like it, I
Yeah.
feel like is worth it, because in any
Mhm.
relationship, like, you need that kind of effort.
Right. I
Mhm.
think it's really cool kind of to compare the relationship with God to a relationship with a friend because honestly, there's so many parallels. You
Mhm.
need to still reach out to God, get to know him, just like you
Yeah.
would get to know a friend through their Instagram or through their social media, get
Yeah.
to know God through his word,
Yeah.
and just through spending time with him. I think that's
Exactly.
so true.
Yeah. And he's given us so much in his word. He's revealed so much about himself. It's just up to us
Right.
to
Yeah.
look for it there. Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
love it. Um,
Yeah.
Well, so I read the book as Izzy, high schooler, writing the book, but now I'm
Mm.
speaking to Izzy, the college student, right? And
Right.
college was a long time ago for me, but I remember feeling like college was really different from high school. So
Mm.
one question I would love to ask you, Izzy, is
Yeah.
now having finished your first semester, you're in your second semester of your freshman year at Pepperdine. If you were to add an epilogue to the end of your
Mm.
book, what would you say in it? Would you like go back on anything you wrote in high school, or would you add to
Mm.
it? Would you say something different? I'd love to hear, just kind of having this new life experience, what you would add to the content of your book.
Yeah. No, that's such a fun question. Um, and honestly, I thought that going to college, I guess that there would be all these new things that I would learn, and there's been a
Mhm.
ton of things. But at the end of the day, I think the same message holds true even in college. That people are just as broken and just as empty here that they as they were in high school, and that Jesus is still just as necessary. And I think that's kind of one of the biggest things that I've learned here.
Mhm.
In college, that still following Jesus is the best decision that you can ever make, because that's what gives me the ability to, I think, have so much joy in college, to have so much peace when everything else feels like it's so busy or so stressed out. Just a
Mhm.
certain peace that kind of, yeah, I guess transcends understanding that way. But if I were to add an epilogue to my book, I think I would just emphasize that in college it's just like high school. And
Mhm.
after college, I'm sure that it's just like high school as well, in the sense that we just all need Jesus and we still need him. And that going anywhere different doesn't change that. And probably only magnifies it as you get older and as you have all these different opportunities to pursue. But since I do go to Pepperdine, I will plug that. And if you're a high school student, you should go to Pepperdine. Honestly, it's been the best couple months of my life. Um, and so,
I
yeah,
actually
that is what
recently visited Malibu, and I remember
really.
thinking, how can anyone get any studying done here? Because it's so beautiful.
Right. Yeah, but honestly, I think it's the atmosphere, just
Yeah.
the view and everything. It kind of also just reminds you of God as you're studying.
Yeah.
So it's the extra push of motivation sometimes when you need it as
Oh,
well.
peace.
Yeah.
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 I mean, I love what you said, because that's very true. In some ways, life is the same, but I will
Yeah.
say it's the same with just more distractions,
Right.
more like temptations to look to the world besides God. And I think
Yeah.
in some ways, even as I'm listening to you, I feel humbled and I feel challenged, because it can be easy for someone like myself to say, oh, like things were so easy in high school, or things were so easy in college, and it's so different now. But when I think you're right. I think actually it's the same. And it's just, I've dealt with the same kind of struggles, same idols in my life, but they've just become morphed and magnified. And in
Right.
a way, I need to have the same realizations that you had in high school and you are still having in college.
Right. Yeah. And I think when I first wrote the book, it was just kind of for middle school and high school was kind of
Mhm.
the audience that I had in mind. But after releasing it and just kind of seeing how it's impacted people, I realized that the audience is actually a lot broader. And
Mhm.
it's in reality, it's for parents too who need to be encouraged
Mhm.
by the younger generation's faith. It's for middle schoolers who want to hear a cool story about how a kid like them encountered Jesus, or for high schoolers figuring out their faith for themselves. But it's also for college students who need to be reminded and convicted and challenged amidst everything going on in their
Yeah.
lives, and kind of everyone in between who just needs encouragement. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that no matter what age you are, God is the same God who meets us.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
should write like a Finding God, Finding Me part 2, like 10 years later. And like, what are
No,
the
no, no.
things that you think are still the same? And I think, um,
Yeah.
yeah, people need to hear that. I think people, and I think I think this challenge sometimes is, and I don't know
Mm,
if you've encountered this,
yeah.
but I think sometimes people can look at like fired up young people and think like,
Mm,
oh, that's just because they're young, right? Like that's not going to
right.
last. And so
Yeah.
I think to push against that, like I would love to hear from you or read from you like five,
Yeah.
10 years on the line, that no, like you still have this passion for God, because at the end of the day, like God is the one sustaining that in your life, right? And I don't know,
Yeah.
have you felt any of that, like people kind of,
Mm,
perceiving your passion just because you're young?
yeah. No, I'm sure a lot of people think that too, but I've seen so many older people that have so much more faith than me too, and who are
Mm-hmm.
just as on fire. Recently I went to this youth retreat and there was this speaker there, and he was like in his mid 30s, kind of older, I guess, than me. Um, but when I tell you, he was jumping up and down during the worship songs, not even during the quote unquote hype worship songs, but just the
Mm-hmm.
slow ones, just because that's how much he loves God. And he said something that was really profound, that uh if you change, your faith as you get older, that means you've compromised somewhere along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that stuck with me because I don't want to compromise my faith even as I get older. It should only increase, just as a relationship with a friend would increase. As you get older, your love for God should also increase.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it just goes to show why Jesus lauded childlike faith, right?
Yeah.
And that's what it means, right? Is like you don't
Mm,
overcomplicate and you don't um, compromise along the way for the shiny things of the world around you, but you
right.
hold true to like what's pure and true. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. I
Mm.
hope we are all gonna grow old and jumping up and down, praising
Yeah.
the Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. Um, so just to like kind of start wrapping up our conversation, your book is really about you sharing, it's a testimony, right? Like it's a story about how God met you at this particular time in your life and how that really changed you and how you want to share that with people. And so it's really you sharing your story. And I think that's such a big encouragement to me, because I think
Mm,
it's not a natural thing. And I think specifically within like the Asian American context, it's
mm,
not a natural thing to share your story. I feel like in the Asian cultures, it's not very common. You're told to kind of, keep to yourself. I think speaking out is not as common. And so how would you encourage other youth to
mm.
be more open and bold and confident about sharing their stories? And I think especially Asian American students, how would you encourage them to like have a voice and share their story?
Yeah. No, I think it's so good that you bring up the Asian American side of it, because it's such a reality. And growing up in the Asian American church and now experiencing more multi-ethnic churches and stuff like that too, there is such a difference, and there's definitely a sense of more timidness and reservedness, I think, when it comes to the Asian American church. But we all have such good stories to share, and we need to share them at the same time. And so I guess my encouragement would be, if you're kind of scared or have fear in sharing your story, to first share it with your best friend. I think it happens over the coffee table, over the dinner table. And I think we limit our view of sharing testimonies to be in front of an open mic session at the end of a retreat, or something you have planned that you have to speak for 15 minutes about something. But it really is not all of that. But it really is just asking your friend out to coffee and just sharing your story with them casually. And I would actually argue that that is the most powerful way to do it, because something special happens when a friend hears the powerful story of their friend who they are so close to and who they trust. And it's in those moments where they then start to believe that the same power that changed their friend can also change them too. I think that's where the real magic happens. I have friends who also, after doing that, they started a blog. So then they would they post on it every couple of weeks, just thoughts that they have or convictions that they feel like God has put on their heart, or to post on their Instagram stories, feeling the confidence to finally, I think there's so much fear too in social media and kind of vocalizing your faith through there. But I think those are just some of the things I've learned, some of the methods that my friends have said as well.
And I love the idea of like starting with your friend, because you're starting with someone you feel safe sharing with. And that's kind of like how you build the courage to share with more and more people.
Right.
One thing I would add to that is I think sometimes the fear comes out of just lack of experience of actually articulating what we think or feel in regards to our faith. So one thing I would add is, if just start with journaling, sharing with just you and God, just you and your journal, because that'll help you put words to the things that you are thinking, and then you'll be able to verbalize to your friend over coffee, and then maybe your Instagram.
No, the journaling thing is so good. That's how the book process started too, a process of just journaling, because it wasn't going to be a book from the very beginning. That wasn't the goal. But my mentor at the time just said, you have so many thoughts, just journal some of them down. And I think through journaling those thoughts, that's when God really spoke to me and kind of put together all the pieces and connected everything in my mind so that I could share it then.
I used to journal so much, and especially in college, and I still have all of them. And sometimes I'll just go back and read through like, what were my thought processes at this time, at these like pivotal moments in my life. And it's always really helpful. I don't think my journaling was profound enough to get into a book like yours, but it's always been helpful for me. So that's definitely like a encouragement to others. So Izzy, as we're closing out, how could we, the listeners and the viewers here at SOLA, how could we be praying for you and your campus? Like, what are some of the things that, I think college campus is, it's a beautiful place, but it's also a really difficult place to be a Christian in these days, right? And so I'm sure there are challenges there, but also encouragement. So how can we be praying for you, and how could we be praying for Pepperdine?
Thank you. I think a lot of people think Pepperdine is a Christian school, so I think the general consensus would be, that we have so much more faith than other schools, but in reality, it's not always like that too. And so maybe just a prayer for the campus to be able to take advantage of the faith opportunities at the school, because it does such a good job of cultivating that environment if you take advantage of it. Just praying. I don't know. I have such a heart for just youth and teenagers, because it's such a pivotal point in our lives, and it's at this point where we have so many options to go down, and Jesus is usually just one of them. But just to know that that is the best option that you can take at the end of the day. And then I guess a prayer for myself would be that I would be able to show people that, kind of through that kindness that we were talking about earlier, but being the light on the campus that is able to lead people to him, I guess would be my prayer as well.
Thank you. Well, I personally have been so encouraged by our conversation, and I can't wait for others to hear from you. And as someone who's been doing youth ministry, and even as someone who's been doing ministry as a Asian female, I'm so encouraged to just hear from you, because it gives me a lot of hope for the future. It gives me a lot of hope that there are young women like you who want to do ministry, who want to do youth ministry, the tough work of youth ministry, and the way that you can articulate your faith and be so bold about it. It gives me so much hope and so much encouragement. So even just personally for me, I want to thank you for this time, Izzy. Yeah, and to all of our listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning in. If you haven't, please go get a copy of Izzy's book, Finding God, Finding Me. She did not ask me to endorse her book, but I wanted to endorse it. I guarantee you will be encouraged. And please be praying for Izzy and her future ministry, and even her time at Pepperdine. So thank you all for tuning in, and thank you, Izzy.
Thank you.